Whether you're hitting the road or kicking back in the cab, it's time to take a load off with Big Rig Banter. Powered by AllTruckJobs.com, your source for finding the trucking jobs drivers really want. Get ready to shift into gear and let the conversations roll.
All right, hello and welcome, truckers. The date is October 3rd. It is the 20th episode of Big Rig Banter. I hope you're all doing well out there. I'm your co-host, Troy Diffenderfer.
And I'm your co-host, Lenay Ruhl.
And that's right, I have someone else here in the cab with me. Lenay's going to be sticking with me full-time as a co-host. Lenay, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you might have heard her voice on the previous GATS episode. Lenay was on the floor down at GATS doing a lot of interviews, and she is often working behind the scenes here at Big Rig Banter, so I'm really excited to have her on. Lenay, why don't you tell our listeners about yourself? How'd you end up in the trucking industry, kind of working here?
Sure. So before this life in the trucking industry, I was a journalist for a few years for a business journal. So that gave me exposure to not just trucking, but all kinds of different industries and how they work. And then I found this great company here in Lancaster and decided to switch over to a more of a marketing role. I also spent 3 months a few years ago driving across the country by myself. It was something I always wanted to do, and I spent a lot of miles alone on the road just thinking about life, and it really put into perspective for me what it would be like to be a truck driver. You know, I have a lot of men in my family who drive truck, a few uncles. My dad used to drive truck, and I never really understood what it would be like to be alone on the road with just your thoughts on the highway. So I really can appreciate and respect the drivers who spend their lifetime doing that.
Yeah, and I know this is just your second time you've been on Big Rig Banter, but many folks don't know that Lenay's often, whether it's editing the podcast or helping to listen to the podcast, Lenay's been involved in this for a while. So what are you most looking forward to now that you're kind of on the air and providing a second voice for Big Rig Banter?
Well, anyone who knows me knows that I talk a lot, so I think that I'm looking forward to that, just being able to hang out and chat with you and to bring a new voice and definitely a female perspective to Big Rig Banter. I know there's a lot of ladies out there listening, and I hope to bring more of the women in the trucking industry to Big Rig Banter. And what about you, Troy? I mean, you're asking me all these questions. What draws you to the trucking industry?
Yeah, well, I guess I probably never talked to listeners about this. You know, I don't really introduce myself that much or talk about my background here, but I was really drawn because of how different it is from my own lifestyle. I've never traveled that much, or I've never been someone that would spend time on the road for long periods of time. And to me, that's not something I necessarily would want to do, but I'm always fascinated by these people that make a living traveling across the country. And I think the fact that it's so different from my lifestyle is what really drew me to this. I want to hear these stories from truckers. I want to really dig deep and get inside the mind of a trucker and what it's like. And I think that's a unique perspective to have when it comes to reporting on this stuff, and doing a whole podcast about it is having that kind of naive curiosity into the trucking industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we really love to hear from you guys. So don't be shy. Reach out to us on Facebook. Leave us messages. We'd love to hear your stories and to bring you on the show. If you have an idea, let us know.
Absolutely, truckers. Again, I thank Lenay for coming on to the podcast. I think it's going to be really great to kind of banter back and forth and talk about these issues, do some great interviews, and I think you'll see a lot of our personality come through in these next couple episodes. Today we're going to talk about cargo theft. It's a pretty serious issue, and it's not something that maybe truckers always think about, but it's certainly something that you should be aware of. I know many schools don't really cover it. Everyone thinks, oh, that could never happen to me, but we'll give you some statistics later in the show that say it's actually more frequent than you think. All right, so let's look into some cargo theft statistics. Cargo theft recording firm CargoNet actually reported in 2017 that it was one of the safest years in terms of cargo theft and other theft incidents since the firm began recording them. A total of 741 cargo thefts were reported to the firm last year in the U.S. and Canada, with an average value loss of nearly $200,000. The number of cargo thefts in 2017 was actually 12% lower than in 2016. The firm also recorded another 1,500 stolen tractors, trailers, or intermodal chassis and containers during the year. Food and beverage items were the most commonly stolen in 2017, representing 22% of all cargo thefts, CargoNet reports. Meat products and alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages were the most stolen in this category. So I think it's important to know that there are cargo thefts that happen out there, and they're extremely financially impactful when it comes to how much is getting stolen. But we have some stories to prove that. Lenay, I know you found some news articles that happened recently about cargo theft incidents.
Yeah, when we were doing our research, I was just reading some news articles seeing exactly how this happens. And, a lot of the cases, this is happening when your truck is parked. So it's going to happen when it's in a warehouse or in a fenced yard. And actually at truck stops, people are watching you. They see you go inside to relax, and that's when they're most likely to steal your cargo. So these are things to be aware of and to look out for. But enough of us rambling. Let's hear from some experts on the subject of cargo theft and get some prevention tips for you.
Yeah, Lenay had the chance to sit down with some of the guys from the Cargo Security Alliance, so let's take a listen.
Alrighty, I'm here today with Walt Beedling and Eric Hoffer from Cargo Security Alliance, and we're going to talk today about cargo theft. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, thanks.
Very well.
Good. So, Walt, how about you go first and just tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do at Cargo Security Alliance?
Okay, Lenay. My name's Walt Beedling. I'm the managing partner of the Cargo Security Alliance. Our vision, if you will, is we want to secure the global supply chain and expedite the flow of commerce. And there's a trade-off there, because whenever you put security measures in place, there's a tendency to slow things down. Actually, many times if you do it right, it speeds things up, and it certainly protects the assets of the shipper and the motor freight company, and ultimately the consignee. So if you do cargo security right, you not only protect those assets, you also can speed things up and protect those assets. So we've been doing this for quite a while now. The Cargo Security Alliance is really a set of partners that work together in this endeavor. Those being a company called Nova Vision, CGM. They actually provide physical security products, like different kinds of ways to secure seal trucks and packaging materials and things like that. We also have, one of our members is the Regiscope, RDI, and they provide information technology to secure facilities, and specifically to do driver and carrier ID verification. My company is called Cayuga Partners. We actually help clients design secure supply chains from the get-go, with the idea that if you've got a well-conceived supply chain, as goods move through it, the number of stops that they're going to make that they make are minimal. And a favorite saying that we have is, cargo at rest is cargo at risk. So as long as you keep it moving, the probability that anybody's going to be able to tamper with it, steal it, is minimized. So those are the three major stools of the Cargo Security Alliance, the legs of the stool of the Cargo Security Alliance. And as I said, we've been at it for a while. We also have a number of other business partners that we work with to help us fulfill our mission.
All right.
I'll toss it over to Eric.
Yeah. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at the Alliance?
Okay, my company, CGM, has been manufacturing, designing, and patenting security technology for cargo since 1972. I hold a number of patents for things like that you've seen in the marketplace, like tamper-evident tape and other devices to secure pallets and vehicles. As a part of the Cargo Security Alliance, my role has been to use my expertise to figure out which is the best solution for a particular issue facing a shipper based on his supply chain and based on the methodology that he uses to ship his goods. I have been a teacher for a long time. I was the chairman of education for the National Cargo Security Council, which became the International Cargo Security Council after a while. I was spun out by the Department of Transportation. I've written a number of books on the topic, and I used to teach in the U.S. Senate and other places to enlighten people as to the vulnerability of cargo and the vulnerability in general of the supply chain, as to how it affects different types of shippers. That would be in all modalities, like in the shipping by truck and then sea, or truck and then rail. Depending on how the freight moves, the vulnerabilities are different. So I used to enlighten people about that in different venues, most of which involve government and private industry, dealing with basically every commodity possible. So my background in the business has been about since the early 1960s, where I did the same kind of thing in the military.
Awesome. So it's a good thing that I called you, because I really don't know too much about cargo theft except the little bit of reading that I did on the internet prior to our call. So why don't you tell us, how common cargo theft is and why it's such an issue, especially for the trucking industry?
Okay, let me try that one a little bit to start, just to frame that. One thing is, no matter where cargo starts and where it ends up, at some point along that chain, it's going to be in a truck, and often multiple times across that chain, it is in a truck. So, really, trucks are the single most common mode of transportation for cargo in the supply chain. And frankly, most cargo theft that doesn't happen when it's in a warehouse or someplace else happens when it's on a truck, in a truck, something like that. So it is an issue for trucking for sure, and it's very, very common. Cargo theft is a crime that is notoriously underreported. When you talk to folks who keep track of these things, what actually gets reported is just the tip of the iceberg. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I think Eric probably can explain that best.
Most important, cargo theft has been going on forever. So whether the theft involves stealing something, tampering with it, or reloading the pallets with something else to be able to remove the commodity and replace it with telephone books or something with the same weight, has been going on for years. So ever since I got into the business, which was literally in '65, the numbers that started out as minimal, after you realize what the real numbers are, averages somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, 25 to 45 billion with a B, $billion annually. And when you look at that kind of number, which has been gone over by all types of agencies to determine what the real numbers are, you find that it's pretty consistent over time, that the numbers are staggering as to what the losses are. So when you start to recognize that we're talking about a real significant piece of the GDP, now you're saying that this is an under economy. This is a whole economy of all these goods that are being stolen. And then what do you do with stolen goods? You resell them. So now you have a double whammy. You have the goods that are stolen from the consignee, from the owner of those goods, or from the shipper who still owns them. And then those goods are being sold against that intellectual property holder in the field, and they're real, and they're sold now against it. So now you have a market, sub-market, that's selling those goods at a lower price, because they didn't pay for them, obviously, against the manufacturer who is selling them normally. And what happens is you blend the market, which is a tremendous loss for the intellectual property holder who owned the goods originally, and a great profit center for the people that stole them. So when you start to look at cargo theft as an entity, basically it's where another business has formed using the same exact goods with the same exact characteristics, because they're real, that the original manufacturer had. And now you have a whole different economy. You have billions of dollars of goods in the marketplace that have been stolen, and nobody paid taxes on them, and the manufacturer had to remake those goods, and they had to reship those goods, and so the cost of the manufacturer is outrageous. The other thing that Walter's alluding to is that in the cargo theft world, when goods are stolen, if they're recovered, depending on the commodity that we're talking about, by law, those goods, if they're ingestibles, have to be destroyed. So therefore, there's no insurance value because the insurance company recognizes the goods have been recovered. Whether they're usable or not is not a question, but those goods have to be destroyed. So now the owner doesn't make anything. He doesn't get anything on insurance. He doesn't get anything on the value of the goods, and he has to throw them out.
Right.
So, and in cargo theft, the only ones that ever win are the attorneys, because everybody segregates everything to everybody else. So shipper A shipped the goods by carrier B, who gave them to carrier C to deliver. Carrier C suddenly doesn't have the goods, and B sues him, A sues B, and it goes on for years. And at the end of the day, nobody gets anything. So cargo theft is a very, very dynamic business, if you will. It's something that people don't recognize the real effect on the U.S. economy, but it's there. And when you start to evaluate it, you will see that it's one of the most crushing things that can happen to an intellectual property holder.
Right. And so when is this most likely to happen, and where is it most likely to happen?
Okay. Let me try and take that one, Eric. There are certain times of the week and of the month and year when cargo theft is most common, okay? It correlates very strongly, of course, with the volume of activity that happens across the supply chain. And there's a lot of statistical information on that, a lot of data. In terms of where it happens, most cargo theft happens, as I said, cargo at rest is cargo at risk. So it's usually when cargo is either in a truck that's been parked, or in a yard somewhere, or it can also be in warehouses and so forth. There's a lot of inside theft that goes on as well. So again, there are a number of different statistics that you can look at that show when and where cargo theft occurs. And it's pretty well documented. Weekends tend to be a time, because many times the trucks are idle on weekends, and that's a time when it's most vulnerable. Eric, anything to add there?
Well, keep in mind that you have to determine, in terms of cargo theft, the value of the goods. The greater the value, the more apt they are to be surveilled and stolen. And so when you look at trends, obviously, the greater the amount of volume that's shipped out around Christmas time and what have you, is going to be a time when you have to consider that protection levels have to be higher. But in terms of the product that you're shipping, if you're shipping soap powder, that has not anywhere near the level of vulnerability as shipping pharmaceuticals. So you have to look at what the product is, what the supply chain is, when you're shipping, and determine if your particular product has a greater level of vulnerability, and then that's what you want to protect.
Right.
Okay. And are there certain products that are most commonly stolen?
High value. Anything of high value. You can break it down to jewelry, to pharmaceuticals, to cosmetics, to electronics, to anything that has an instant resale value and a high individual value. So you have to also understand that in different countries, because remember, this is a worldwide problem, global problem. You are just as apt to get something, a truckload of toilet paper stolen in Mexico or stolen somewhere in the United States. And that product is then immediately distributed through the barrios, through the stores. And before you know it, and I'm not talking about, they can strip a truck out in a couple of hours and have that stuff completely gone and sold in these small stores. So to them, to that particular group of people, they can get money instantly from the stores. The stores get to buy it for 10 cents on the dollar. The thieves are obviously making a lot of money, and the stuff moves out very, very quickly. So you have to recognize it. It's what your market is and where you are. But clothing, jeans, things that are easily fenced is the basis that the business exists. But the business there's a why to it. Remember, there's a whole underground economy. So when stuff is stolen off the truck, now you have 100 television sets. You have whatever. What are you going to do with it? You have to have a means by which you can get rid of those goods very quickly, because you don't want the truck to be sitting around, much more than a few hours with these stolen goods. You have to recognize what is happening to them. There's a whole marketplace of from gangs to drugs to all types of different people who have their sights on being able to move cargo. Because as Walter said before, there aren't really no remedies. It's property crime. So when you find people that would normally maybe say rob a store, rob a jewelry store, or rob a bank, they'd be more apt to hijack a truck that has $30 million worth of cargo in it and sell it for $1 million, and they're out free and clear. So you have to recognize that it's a much more dynamic thing than just stealing the cargo. So keep that in mind. There's a lot more to it.
And before we get into like prevention tips, is there anything else that you guys want to mention just to paint the picture of cargo theft, how, why, where it happens?
Well, where it happens is, as Walter said, typically when freight is left unattended is one particular time that somebody would go for it. And that means that the stuff can be unattended at a transship point in a warehouse. It can be unattended at the outset, where somebody takes the product from the original shipper, opens the pallets, takes out what they want, reseals the pallets, put them back on the truck, and the stuff moves out. It's already been stolen. There's another problem where somebody might hijack the vehicle. So now the vehicle is en route. The driver gets out of the truck to eat. He leaves the truck alone, and somebody will go in and steal the truck. Another thing might be a more violent type of hijacking, where the driver is being watched from the time he leaves the warehouse, and he might have millions of dollars worth of goods on there, or he might have hundreds of thousands of dollars of just general cargo, and then one pallet of OxyContin, and then suddenly you have that particular truck being hijacked. All they want is that one very, very expensive pallet. So that's another way. And then, of course, upon delivery, if there's confusion, if there's a lot of boxes, whereas as opposed to palletizing it with a visual chain of custody, where everything is in chaos, that has to do with liquor and things like that, where just it's boxes of this, boxes of that, and no one particular pallet worth of goods, then they will short you, or somebody will sign a bill of lading saying that there were 30 boxes and there were actually only 27, and so now suddenly you have a claim. So
right.
There's all sorts of ways of having cargo being removed, manipulated, stolen, or otherwise missing at the time of delivery.
Yeah, I just wanted to make another point, Lenay, just to expand a little bit on this. I think that there are sort of different types of cargo theft. I think at one end of the spectrum, you do have these sort of high value goods, pharmaceuticals, electronics, things like that. Those crimes tend to be more targeted, premeditated, if you will, better planned out. I think, on the other hand, you have the sort of general commodities, as Eric mentioned, that are very easy to fence. Stuff that's virtually untraceable, like toilet paper or detergent or whatever it may be.
Right.
That's also very attractive because it's so easy to get rid of, and frankly, it's again almost impossible to trace. So kind of depending on the modus operandi of the cargo thieves, they're going to target different types of cargoes and then use perhaps different types of techniques to identify where it is, track it, and take it. So just wanted to make that point.
Sure, thank you. So when truck drivers are on the road, what are some things that they can do to prevent cargo theft from happening?
Well, remember that the person who is standing next to the truck upon delivery is suddenly the person who is going to be accused of the loss. Whether the loss happened at the factory where it was made and it was short shipped, whether it happened in the warehouse where it was transshipped, whether it happened anywhere along the supply chain, the guy that comes in with the goods, who is the driver, is suddenly attacked by the recipient, who says, "Hey, where's the rest of my goods?" And the driver sitting there with egg in his face has no idea. So if a driver recognizes that he's moving cargo, any kind of cargo, cargo, whatever he's moving, if he's moving it in a truckload volume, at that point, requesting that door be locked and sealed in some way that can't be manipulated, and then he could photograph that, or he could make sure that number is on the bill of lading, such that when he gets to destination, he can go to the recipient, go to the dock foreman, whoever he's going to open the doors, and he would go up there and he'd say, "Hey, this is the bill of lading," and on the bill of lading, there's a seal number in it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he goes out, then the driver can take the guy out to the vehicle itself, and before he opens the door, whether it's a roll up or swing door, whatever it happens to be, he can be able to say with some level of certainty that this type of seal was on there and the number is the same. Now, seals are not all the same, so using a seal that is appropriate to the vehicle to make sure that nobody can surreptitiously open it and circumvent the seal is also critical. But having a chain of custody such that when the driver picks up the cargo, he can attest that that particular number is assigned to that particular freight, and suddenly at least he's vindicated that, hey, I picked it up with this number, I delivered it with this number, and I didn't open the trailer. When there's nothing on the trailer or something that is an inappropriate seal for that level of protection, then the driver again can be vulnerable. And so the drivers always should recognize that they need to protect their interests by doing something proactively to identify the cargo as contained and controlled while it was in their care.
Right. One thing nowadays that you have is most drivers do have smartphones, where they can take pictures and document the loads that they're carrying. If there's anything at all suspicious, it's easy for them nowadays to document that, and they should be very careful to do that. So I just wanted to highlight that as one technique that can and should be used. Eric mentioned the whole idea of a chain of custody, and the driver is a key custodian, if you will, of that cargo in that chain, and so understanding what the chain of custody is, making sure the documentation is all correct and accurate, double checking the bills of lading with what they actually have. Again, checking those seals, all those kinds of things. You can't be too careful when you're accepting cargo for shipment. I think when you're actually on the road, then you need to have what is usually called situational awareness. Drivers need to be very careful to check periodically to make sure they're not being followed. That their truck has been targeted possibly and is being followed by someone. They need to be very careful when they actually park, if they do have to park along the route, that they're parking in a well-lit area. If they can, back up against a wall, for example, so that it's hard to get into the back of the truck. If they haven't sealed it properly with locks, which often they fail, they don't do. And it's amazing when you drive down the highway, look and see how many of those doors are actually locked. The vast majority of doors, swing doors, roll-up doors on trucks are not locked, which is pretty amazing. So following all those just common sense procedures is really, really important. If it's a real high-value load, pharmaceuticals, electronics, whatever it may be, then team driving is indicated, where there's always somebody with the truck if somebody has to stop. limiting the amount of distance that's traveled in a particular on a particular route, avoiding those high-risk lanes that we talked about a little bit earlier. All those kinds of things. You need to think through what you're doing and making sure that you're not going into a high-risk situation, a high-risk area. All those kinds of things are very, very important for the driver to be aware of.
Right. And so, I mean, obviously no driver wants it to happen to them, but if it does, what should they do?
Well, if somebody recognizes that there's a theft that has occurred, then the driver needs to make sure he stays with the freight and has some way to be able to vindicate himself. If the driver gets into a situation where he is being surveilled or he's being brought into a choke point where he can't back out or he can't do anything, the most important thing he can do is be observant, try to understand who is there. I mean, he could call 911 while he's still in the vehicle. He could lock himself in the vehicle. That's another possibility. But no cargo in the whole world is worth anybody's life. So when you understand that, that you have to recognize that if there's a situation where the driver is in fear of his life, you really want to give up that cargo and not start a situation where the driver is protecting those goods, because there's no product in the world that's worth his life.
Yeah. And in the United States, I think it's rare for drivers to be physically threatened and hijacked. It happens, but it's rare because of the implications of that the thieves have. They're not going to want to go down that path because, as Eric said, I mean, if it's just a property theft, 9 times out of 10, those things don't really get followed up. But if it turns into something where somebody's been physically harmed or worse, then all of a sudden the heat comes. In other geographies, that's not the case. They're much more likely to put the driver's life at risk to affect cargo theft than here. Like places like Mexico, parts of Europe, and Africa, places like that, physical violence against drivers is much more common than it is here.
And yeah, you have to recognize that most of these drivers that are out there on the street have been driving for a bit, and most of them they really do understand what they need to do to protect their interests. That's really important to recognize. These guys are not stupid. They don't want to get hurt, and they want to be sure that they are in a position to get out, extract themselves from whatever this peril happens to be. So most drivers know the ways to get out of it. But typically what happens is if goods are stolen somewhere along the supply chain and this guy's suddenly coming in and delivering them, and they open the boxes and they're all full of telephone books, that driver, he's done for. I mean, because he's going to be accused of the theft. He's going to be accused of being complicit. He's going to be accused of something, and there's going to be ramifications, because it's not that they're going to pursue the crime as much as he's going to get fired because he's implicated in the theft.
Right. Are there any regulations regarding cargo theft that are in place right now, or new ones that drivers should be aware of?
I think the biggest thing that's happening right now in the motor freight industry, number one is the economy is booming right now, and there are a lot of constraints on the availability of transportation assets, especially trucks and truck drivers. So that is a problem in the sense that there's a lot more freight moving. So there are many more opportunities for theft to occur. The other thing that's happening at the same time is there's something called the ELD mandate, the electronic logging device mandate, that
Right.
has been that was actually implemented by the federal government in the beginning of April of this year, that requires drivers to record a lot of information. They have electronic logging devices in the trucks now by law. It also limits their hours of service. So what happens is when drivers have reached that limit of hours of service, what do? They have to get the truck off the road and they have to rest. Okay. So again, cargo at rest, cargo at risk. So the combination of this volume of activity combined with the ELD mandate, that means there's drivers are actually allowed to spend less time actually driving, has created a situation where cargo theft, there are many more opportunities for cargo theft to occur. We really haven't seen the data yet. My suspicion is that when that comes out, we're going to see a spike in cargo theft for those reasons. There's more cargo moving, and there's more cargo at rest because by law, drivers are being forced to spend less time actually on the road. Eric, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's absolutely true. That's right. It just, things are changing, and thieves are not stupid. They spend all day, every day, 24 hours a day, thinking about how they can beat the system. And at this point in time, when you are a shipper, or you're a carrier, or a truck driver who is basically honest, you spend about a minute a day thinking about that. You just don't think about it. You just run your logistical operation as you would normally. And then what happens is when the data starts coming in where you have losses that are 3%, 5%, 10%, suddenly the numbers, are in your bottom line, and they're on your balance sheet. And that's when people start to really get serious about the problem. But thieves are thinking about it all the time, and they can beat you anytime they want. If you don't think about it at all, you, as a company, are remiss in being able to protect the goods that you own already. And in a lot of cases, that's a problem that corporate America doesn't even talk about. They don't think about it. They don't talk about it. But, in the boardrooms, there's definitely, a major issue because the people there say, how come we lost $40 million? Where did it go? And at that point in time, suddenly now you have a recognition that this has happened, but you don't have any plan to do anything about it. Or somebody might bury it and say, well, we lost this money, but, and then somebody's going to glosses it over. So it's a real major problem. Cargo theft is a very, very serious issue to your bottom line. And unless people take it seriously, they're never going to do anything about it. And that amount of money which is going to stay, as I said, in the supply chain as an underground economy. It's goods that you didn't pay for that you're selling, and goods that have to be remade, reshipped, all the things that are associated with having to make the goods in the first place. You have to do it all over again.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You're bringing up the ELD mandate and just drivers having to stop when they reach so many hours. So it'll be interesting to see how those numbers change or if they change.
And again, many times it's not reported. I was going to say, again,
Sure.
Recognizing, Lenay, that many times it's not reported. So, those data are not the most reliable data out there.
Right.
But my guess is that we're going to see a spike.
Right.
Just envision if you were, I'm using an example, and this has nothing to do with reality, but
Right.
if you were J&J, or you were Pfizer, or you were somebody who is a big major name in any industry, whether you're selling cameras or you're selling whatever, but a big name in the industry, and you're a public company, and you are selling stock on the one end to people to invest in your business, and on the other end, you're losing your shirt in cargo theft.
Right.
Nobody's going to report the fact that they have had millions, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars in losses, and that comes right off the bottom line, dollar for dollar. That's profit at 100% value, and suddenly that's gone. And then B, now suddenly you have competition where you didn't have any competition before, selling your own goods cheaper than you are, so you're not going to sell the same level that you were selling. And so if those things are reported and people start to recognize that's happening to this particular company, now you have even a further problem because your bottom line has been affected. And so most cargo thefts in general terms are not reported because there's no benefit in reporting them because you've already lost it and you don't want to tell anybody about it. Why air your dirty laundry when you don't have to? So keep that in mind too. That's very important in a way to the companies rationalize cargo theft.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Thank you. Is there anything else you guys want to mention or you think is important to talk about when it comes to cargo theft before we wrap up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we do, what our company does, is we sell technology, very inexpensive, highly effective technology to be able to stop cargo theft. Whether it's identifying a loss in a small box by tamper-evident tape, or whether it's sealing a truck with a locking bar that goes across the keeper rods, whether it's creating an electronic lock that goes on the back of a roll-up door, or a protocol for being able to ship from point A to point B, or we make specialized locks that are used to seal a tractor trailer brake locks to be lock out the truck so it can't be moved. All these different things are what we do. And so when somebody comes to us, the whole idea of being an alliance of different companies with different technologies, we can modify a game plan for somebody to reduce their vulnerability to a particular supply chain loss. And so remember that, these things are happening, but there are remedies. And since most companies are very, very reluctant to create a remedy, which I can't understand, and I've been doing this since 1965. I can't understand why companies are not willing to step up and say, I can lose hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and it might take a few $1,000s, literally, to secure my supply chain and to make my customers less vulnerable. Suddenly, they just don't do it, and that blows my mind, makes me crazy. I have no idea why people can sit there in front of me and say, I'm not going to do that, when I know that their losses are seven figures. I just don't, I don't get it.
And a lot of big companies just put right on their balance sheet a number for shrinkage. It's like, X percent. And this cargo theft stuff just gets buried in there. So, and it's a shame because it does affect the bottom line, as Eric said. And it can also have many, many other deleterious effects. So, so we'd be happy to, if anybody's interested, we have, as Eric said, a number of products that we sell, best practices, types of products and services that we can provide to help folks figure out how to better secure their assets and protect the chain of custody and their supply chains at the same time. You can learn more about us on our website, which is securecargo.org, www.securecargo.org.
Yeah, we'll include a link to that website at the bottom in the notes for this podcast, so you guys can check that out. Thank you, Eric and Walt, for being on the call with me today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's a great opportunity. Hopefully it'll make some people take notice of the issue and do something about it.
Yep. Thanks for asking, Lenay. We appreciate it.
All right, and again, a big thanks to Cargo Security Alliance and Lenay for putting together that interview. And folks, if you like what you hear, don't forget to give us a review on iTunes, find us on Facebook or Twitter. We always want to interact with our listeners, so feel free to reach out if you have an idea for a future episode, or if you have a company that you think would be a great fit to come on our podcast.
Yeah, and if you have any additional questions about cargo theft, feel free to reach out to us. We can get some answers for you. We'll also be writing a blog on AllTruckJobs.com with further details about cargo theft, so keep an eye out for that.
Well, Lenay, you didn't mess up too bad, so I guess we'll keep you for another episode. How do you think you did?
Oh, I don't know. I think I did all right. Pulled out my old reporting skills and put them to the test. What do you think?
I think you did a great job, and I'm excited to have you on for the next episode. And speaking of, I don't think we've really decided what our next episode is. I know you had a couple ideas. Yeah,
I was thinking maybe doing something about nonprofits since it's Thanksgiving. We also tossed around the idea of doing something with veterans, so I guess we'll have to hash that out and see what we come up with.
Yeah, that's right, folks. Stay tuned for our next episode coming in November, and you'll have to find out what we decide to talk about. But I'm your co-host, Troy Diffenderfer.
And I'm your co-host, Lenay Ruhl.
And this has been Big Rig Banter.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Big Rig Banter. For your next job, check out AllTruckJobs.com, the premier online source for finding the best driver jobs in the country. Browse hundreds of positions by freight or driver type to get back on the road with confidence. Click subscribe to keep the conversations coming. Until next time on Big Rig Banter.